Good yontif. I have a small pleasure that I'm just tickled by. I love to get someone talking about the generations that have come after their own. And you know exactly what sorts of comments are likely to be made. You might hear them say that, they don't have any work ethic or any patience. They might point to their sense of entitlement or their overinflated sense of self-worth. There's been a lot of research done on the trends that show up differently in the greatest generation, the boomers, Generation X, Gen Z, the millennials. But recently, Betsy Stone was facilitating a group of rabbis of whom I was a part. And she shared research on the ways that each generation reported their hopes and dreams for their children. And I thought this was really interesting. It seems that, generally, the greatest generation wanted their children to be seen and not heard, to become dutiful, contributing members of both the family and the community. The boomers, they want their kids to be safe and to have more than they had themselves. Gen Xers, that's my cohort, we just want our kids to be happy. And we're going to have to wait to see what trend the upcoming generations will emphasize. But I'm going to keep our eyes on this last message, since it is the predominant theme that we see emphasized all over our society today. Think for a moment about the implications of communicating to our children that they can be anything they want to be and that we only want them to be happy. It's a lovely message, but we also know it's not true. There are sundry factors that will get in the way of those messages and may leave the child feeling like they were either lied to or are somehow a failure. After all, taken to its extreme, if you're told that your parents just want you to be happy and you have a bad day or a bad year, or if you were born with a brain chemistry that doesn't lend itself to lightheartedness, then you could easily feel as though you've let them down and failed to achieve their dreams for you. Viktor Frankl teaches that it is a characteristic of the American culture that again and again one is commanded and ordered to be happy. But happiness, he said, cannot be pursued. It must ensue. One must have a reason to be happy. I assume I'm not alone in feeling the occasional twinge of guilt about feeling happy when I know that there's so much suffering in the world and that there are so many great tasks that need to be tackled. But why should I feel guilty? After all, I'm an American. Does that not mean life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? These are self-evident truths. But did you know that some of you history buffs will, that this timeless, famous sentence was changed at the last minute? Originally, Thomas Jefferson had penned it to read life, liberty, and the possession of property. The pursuit of happiness is a very different idea, and one that Judaism has emphasized as important from our earliest moments. The month of Adar, with the holiday of Purim, is a time of happiness. The morning service points our attention to our presence in God's house at all times and tells us that happiness is the reward for that awareness. Maimonides goes on to make it even more clear, writing, "The joy which a person derives from doing good deeds is a supreme form of divine worship. To be happy, according to Rambam, is prayer itself." Rabbi Heschel famously made this manifest when he explained that marching next to Martin Luther King left him feeling like he was praying with his feet. He wrote, "Just to be is a blessing. Just to live is holy. All these examples are time-bound, and they take a little effort, just as Frankel described. They're all wonderful while we're in the moment, but they all come to an end. Nobody stays joyful, happy, or in that transcendent state all the time. Remember, Heschel told us that just to live is a blessing. But then he goes on and he writes, "Yet being alive is no answer to the problems of living. To be or not to be is not the question. The vital question," he said, "is how to be and how not to be." And let's be honest, there are an awful lot of factors out there these days working against the general happiness of those in the world, aren't there? Climate change, threats to democracy, the debate over a woman's rights to choose, the rights of minorities, immigration, gun control, the Israeli occupation of the Palestinians, the war in Ukraine, the impacts of COVID on our children and on our parents. Shall I go on? Because I can. What ought to be the individual's proper response to these types of globally significant challenges? They're overwhelming, and they often leave me feeling paralyzed. Of course, I can go to a rally, and I try to do so. I can encourage others and then participate myself in voting, and I do that too. I can recycle and compost and try to bring the bees back with my garden. Check. I can strive to raise up a generation that behaves better than we've behaved, and I'm doing my best. But none of that seems like enough. A great many of the things that I worry about, if I'm being honest, I have no control over. So here's my secret: a 3-step program to preserve one's own sanity in the midst of a world that too often feels insane. The first step is teshuvah, repentance by the traditional teaching. But here, we require a recontextualized understanding of the word and its implications. Rabbi Rami Shapiro suggests that we make too big a deal of the word, and that it's way more simple than you've always been taught. Better that we think of the word teshuvah based on the word shuv, or return. In other words, a return to proper perspective. Rabbi Shapiro turns our attention back to that list of calamities that I mentioned above, and he reminds us that everything on that list that I created is small potatoes. Even all together, they don't add up to a hill of beans. Not when you think about it from the point of view of the universe. Nothing that matters to us on this little rock in the corner of a middle-aged solar system, in the midst of an unremarkable middle-sized galaxy, none of it matters. Nothing, not great nor small, that any human being has ever done matters at all to the universe. The universe isn't paying attention, and it doesn't care. On the one hand, that can sound pretty lonely and depressing, but I assure you, that's not the only way to interpret this. When we name exactly how this makes us feel, we open ourselves to the possibility that everything else we usually think about ourselves and our own importance is an expression of the survival-focused brain, our ego, our yetzer hara. To that sense of self, nothing matters more than me. But our spiritual mind has a quick, honest answer. It's not that we don't matter. Rather, we don't matter any more than anybody or anything else in the universe. We have to admit that we're just marvelously configured lumps of stardust with the miraculous ability to be self-aware and ask big questions. We can often reclaim this healthy, proper perspective in the midst of quiet moments of thought or prayer or meditation, Rabbi Shapiro explains this as the meaning of teshuvah, to return our awareness of how small and insignificant we are, and in doing so, to destroy the ego's control over us for short amounts of time. Most of you know what I'm describing, and you value it, and you cultivate it, and you seek to increase it. In those moments, we find our inner calm. We sit and we watch puppies play, and we find that we're overwhelmed with love. We appreciate the beauty of the natural world around us and the emotional resources within us. It certainly feels like a great tranquility in these precious moments because we have turned our attention away from the plight of the world. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks describes it this way: joy lives not in the thoughts of tomorrow, but in the grateful acceptance and celebration of today. We are here. We are alive. We are among others who share our sense of jubilation. And yes, we do not know what tomorrow may bring. And yes, we are surrounded by enemies. And yes, it was never the safe or easy option to be a Jew. But when we focus on the moment, allowing ourselves to dance, sing, and give thanks, when we do things for their own sake, not for any other reward, when we let go of our separateness and become a voice in the holy choir, then there is joy. Sometimes the Jewish mystics call this sort of being present, seeing expansively, or in Hebrew, mochin de gadlut. Living in the moment is pretty good. None of the past trauma and baggage of my life matters, and none of the future anxiety or drive has a hold on me. When we allow it to fully surround us, we find that we've got plenty of oxygen to breathe, and we occupy miraculous bodies to hold our thoughts while we're doing the breathing. And in that moment, that is enough. Teshuvah. It might be an overly simplified choice of words, but in these moments, I feel happy. But we also know that we will inevitably be yanked out of that reverie and back into the real world. Now, this is important. Pay attention. As we return to the material world around us, and the crises and the challenges and the problems are right where we left them, we realize that the trip into a divine awareness wasn't just a pleasant detour or a distraction, because, as I said before, Chadesh Yamenu Kakedem, we return, but we're not the same. We've returned with a slightly altered perspective. We see the world anew, and with a twinge of appreciation that we'd forgotten before that wonderful, quiet moment. And now, we're ready to turn to the second part of the process. Step 2 is called tikkun. Now, some of you are thinking, I know that word. And you're right. You've heard that before. Tikkun olam, repairing the world. A euphemism for social action and good deeds. But we've already addressed how overwhelming this goal can feel, and so I'm going to return again to Rabbi Shapiro and his teachings here. He suggested a somewhat more modest version of this one as well. The word tikkun can better be translated into English as realignment, or setting things right. In our day-to-day, we forget those truths that we've been covering these last several minutes. And when we remember who we are and what we are, then we realign ourselves with the universe. As parts of this divine universe, equal in importance to absolutely everything else, then we have to admit that we must be capable then of divine things. This remembering is a spiritual tikkun. And it will naturally lead us to gemilut chasadim, loving one another, lifting one another. We deserve kindness and love as divine beings, and so, therefore, does every other person walking the planet. And contributing to that global balance sheet of mitzvahs will leave us feeling happy, having embodied our own divinity. Isaac Luria was one of our earliest mystics, living in Svat in the late 1500s. He used imagery that's represented on the tapestry behind me as a representation of his creation myth. In a nutshell, at the beginning of time, God created vessels to store all the divine energy of the universe, but they shattered in a Big Bang. The shards of the vessels fell to the earth and are still all around us to this day. Luria taught that our job is to lift them back up through our acts of holiness, and in doing so, realign them with their spot. He said this would bring the Messiah to our world. I always misunderstood the point of his myth. I thought that it was encouraging me to do my part to bring about the Messiah. And more, I now think that the real message is summarized in the title of Rabbi Robert Levine's book, There Is No Messiah, and You're It. The idea of the Messiah may not speak to you. It certainly doesn't speak to me. I don't believe that my actions will be tipping the divine scales, convincing God that we finally merit the time to send the Messiah. I don't believe that I am adding credit to my personal account of mitzvahs so that God will let me into heaven when I die. But I do powerfully believe that I am simply contributing to the amount of love and compassion that exists in the universe, and that is more than good enough. Teshuvah suggests sitting down for a minute and seeing the big picture. Tikkun suggests standing up and getting to work, bringing more love and alignment into the world. And this is step number 3, deciding what is the right balance between the two. Are you going to get angry and let your frustration overtake you and poison your one and only chance at living this life? There are a few of you in this room who I know are consumed by your righteous rage. You're out there fighting the good fight. I'm so grateful for you, your leadership, and your inspiration, but I'm also a little concerned about the trauma caused to your soul by such tireless upset. For example, think of a famous fighter whose name you know, Greta Thunberg. Thunberg, forgive me. She demonstrates a legendary and unyielding defense of the climate, but we also know that it almost tore her family apart. She spent Friday nights protesting instead of being with friends, and she ruined her mother's career as a result of her extremism. What we see looks like she's chipping away at an iceberg of a problem. The immense scale means her progress is too small to be measured. Like her, some of you are fighting a revolution against the wave of darkness you see expanding across the world. We need you, and we are inspired by you, and we will help you. But remember that many revolutionaries find that they cannot live in the societies that they want to change due to their holy anger. Remember the story of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, who was banished by God to a cave because he couldn't live in this world without his righteous anger consuming in fire everything that he saw. Only once he learned to calm down was he permitted to return to the world of the living. Dr. King famously wrote, "Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that." You warriors for good need to take an occasional Shabbat from doing battle to remember why you're doing so in the first place. And there are many of you in this room who are not disturbed enough. You turn your attention away from the issues in order to live your lives. You turn off the news because you're so tired of hearing the same upsetting stories, and you focus on the need to drive your kids around and to achieve your personal or professional goals. And you too must take a Shabbat from those important tasks and get to know your anger more personally. And by that I mean your upset at the world has not translated into acts of love and kindness. I'll speak more about this tomorrow morning, but this is the central principle in the role that we're able to play in the world. Instead of chipping away at the proverbial iceberg, we should be building the proverbial hill of beans. There are an awful lot of little yet holy elements upon which we do have influence, but they require an intentional decision. Questions that we have to ask ourselves and whose answers will make all the difference. Do I have the strength and the will to smile at people when I'm upset? Can I find the good in people with whom I struggle? Can I step beyond my own needs and pick up the phone to call people who have no reason to expect it and to tell them that I was just thinking about them? Can I turn my attention from how much I do for others and how ungrateful they are, and instead look someone in the eye and tell them just how much I appreciate them? Do I have the self-confidence to listen deeply and respectfully to another and to genuinely appreciate and thank them for sharing their perspective? We know that these things are not going to save the world, but they may save our place in it. We admit that they're not going to bring the Messiah, but they might bring people together. And there is no way that they will end global crises, but they may temper a personal crisis, and that may be enough. I opened with the question, is happiness the highest blessing we can offer our children? We all know that there will be times when we're going to be happy and other times when we won't be and feel sad and upset. What's more, we now see that not only is feeling sad or scared or upset or overwhelmed not a failure, it can also be a blessing when it encourages us toward holy acts of love and kindness, bringing happiness to us and to the world. These days of awe, we're encouraged to engage in teshuvah, or return, and tikkun, or repair. The teshuvah is internal, and the tikkun is external. The first leads to the second, and when we're lucky, engaging in tikkun can also lead to the inner peace, and yes, the happiness of performing teshuvah. And striking the healthy balance of these two is what will leave us feeling satisfied and full of morally responsible existential joy. Good Yontif.